In a quiet little town where everyone knew each other, life moved at a slow and predictable pace. Among the residents was a young girl named Maria Rodriguez, whose days were filled with simple joys despite the challenges she faced. Her father, Enrique, worked long hours as the school janitor, sweeping hallways, fixing broken desks, and making sure the building stayed clean for students and teachers alike. Though his job didn't pay much, Enrique took pride in his work because it allowed him to provide for Maria, even if their meals were humble and their home small. Maria was an observant child, always eager to learn. She loved sitting in class, soaking up every word her teachers said, whether it was about history, science, or art. But no matter how hard she tried, some of her teachers seemed to overlook her potential. They assumed that because her father cleaned floors instead of wearing suits, Maria wouldn't amount to much. What can someone like her achieve? They whispered among themselves during lunch breaks, unaware of the fire burning inside the quiet girl. One chilly afternoon, something happened that would change Maria's life forever. During a music appreciation lesson, the teacher played recordings of famous musicians performing on instruments like pianos, flutes, and violins. The classroom buzzed with excitement as students marveled at the beauty of classical music. Then came a moment that stung deeper than Maria expected. When the teacher asked who might want to try playing one of these instruments someday, a few kids raised their hands enthusiastically. Others laughed nervously, knowing such opportunities weren't meant for them. And then, almost casually, the teacher turned to Maria and said, "Maybe you should give the violin a shot." The room erupted into giggles. To the teacher, it had been a harmless joke, a way to lighten the mood, but to Maria, it felt like a slap in the face. How could someone dismiss her so easily? Did they really think she wasn't capable of anything beyond mopping floors like her dad? As tears threatened to spill over, Maria clenched her fists under her desk, forcing herself not to cry. Instead, a strange determination began to take root in her heart. Why shouldn't she play the violin? What made it impossible just because of where she came from? That evening, when Maria got home, she couldn't stop thinking about what had happened. She found her father in the kitchen, cooking dinner while humming softly to himself. Taking a deep breath, Maria told him everything. The mocking tone of the teacher, the laughter of her classmates, and the unexpected anger she felt bubbling inside her. To her relief, Enrique listened patiently without judgment. When she finished, he smiled gently and said, "Maria, people will always tell you what you can't do. But remember this, talent doesn't care about money or titles. If you truly want something, nothing can stop you." Those words struck a chord with Maria. For the first time, she realized that maybe the joke wasn't on her. It was on those who doubted her. That night, as she lay in bed staring at the ceiling, Maria made a silent promise to herself. She would prove them all wrong. Little did she know, this decision would set her on a path she could never have imagined. The next morning, Maria woke up with a strange sense of purpose. The sting of the teacher's joke still lingered in her mind, but it no longer felt like a weight dragging her down. Instead, it had transformed into something else, a spark of determination that refused to be extinguished. As she helped her father clean the school auditorium after classes ended for the day, she couldn't stop thinking about the violin. What did it feel like to hold one? To draw the bow across its strings and create music that could move people? The thought consumed her. That evening, as they sat together at their small wooden table eating dinner, Maria finally voiced what had been swirling in her mind all day. "Papa," she began hesitantly, "what if I really tried to play the violin?" Enrique paused mid-bite, his fork hovering over his plate. He studied his daughter's face, noting the seriousness in her eyes. After a moment, he smiled warmly. "Maria, if that's what you want, then we'll find a way," he said firmly. "But remember, learning anything takes time and effort. Are you ready for that?" Maria nodded eagerly. She didn't care how hard it would be. She just knew she wanted to try. Enrique, seeing her resolve, decided to help however he could. Though he wasn't a musician himself, he had dabbled in playing the guitar during his younger years. That night, he rummaged through an old box in the corner of their tiny living room, pulling out a worn-out psalm book and a notebook filled with scribbled notes about chords and scales. "This might not be exactly what you need," he admitted, handing them to Maria, "but it's a start." For weeks, Maria pored over the materials her father gave her. She read about musical notes, rhythms, and melodies, trying to absorb as much as possible. Without an actual instrument to practice on, she resorted to creative methods, using a ruler as a makeshift bow and cradling an imaginary violin between her chin and shoulder. She mimicked the movements she'd seen in videos online. Every evening, after finishing her homework, she stood in front of the mirror, practicing until her arms ached and her fingers cramped. Her father watched her progress with quiet pride. One night, as Maria struggled to hum a particularly tricky melody, Enrique pulled out his old guitar and began strumming along. Together, they turned their modest kitchen into a makeshift concert hall, laughing and experimenting with sounds. For Maria, these moments were precious, not only because they brought her closer to understanding music, but also because they reminded her that she wasn't alone in this journey. Despite her growing enthusiasm, the road ahead wasn't easy. Some classmates continued to tease her whenever they saw her pretending to play the violin in the hallway, still dreaming of Carnegie Hall. One boy sneered one afternoon, earning chuckles from his friends. Maria clenched her fists, fighting back tears, but she forced herself to smile instead. "Maybe someday," she replied calmly before walking away. Deep down, she knew their words didn't matter. What mattered was the fire within her, the same fire that kept her practicing late into the night, even when everyone else was asleep. As days turned into weeks, Maria became more determined than ever. She started borrowing books from the local library, devouring everything she could find about violins and famous musicians. She learned about composers like Mozart and Beethoven, whose stories inspired her to dream bigger. Slowly but surely, she began to see herself not as the girl who cleaned classrooms alongside her father, but as someone capable of creating beauty in the world. One evening, as Maria sat cross-legged on the floor flipping through a borrowed book, she looked up at her father and asked, "Do you think I'll ever get to play a real violin, Papa?" Enrique put down the mop he'd been using to clean the kitchen and walked over to her. Kneeling beside her, he placed a hand on her shoulder. "Maria," he said softly, "if anyone can make that happen, it's you. Just keep believing." Little did either of them know, fate had already begun weaving its threads. Something extraordinary was about to come their way, something that would change Maria's life forever. Fate has a way of surprising people when they least expect it, and for Maria and her father, that moment came on an ordinary Tuesday evening. Enrique had been working late at the school, tidying up the auditorium after a rowdy rehearsal by the drama club. As he swept under the rows of seats, his broom hit something hard hidden beneath a pile of old props and dusty curtains. Curious, he bent down to investigate and pulled out a battered violin case. Its surface was scratched, and one of the latches was broken, but it was intact. Enrique's heart skipped a beat as he opened the case. Inside lay a violin, its wood worn and faded, with strings that looked frayed from years of neglect. It wasn't perfect. In fact, it seemed like it had been abandoned for decades. But to Enrique, it was nothing short of a miracle. He carefully picked it up, inspecting it closely. The instrument was clearly old, but it still held a certain charm, a quiet dignity that spoke of stories untold. This could be it, he whispered to himself, his mind racing with possibilities. That night, when Enrique returned home, Maria was sitting on the floor surrounded by sheets of paper covered in scribbled notes and diagrams of violins she'd sketched from memory. Her face lit up when she saw the case in her father's hands. "What is that?" she asked, her voice trembling with anticipation. Without a word, Enrique placed the case on the table and opened it. For a moment, Maria just stared at the violin, her eyes wide with disbelief. Then tears welled up in her eyes as she reached out to touch it. "Is this for me?" she whispered. "It looks like it found us," Enrique replied with a gentle smile. "Maybe it's meant to help you chase your dream." Maria hugged the violin tightly, feeling its weight against her chest. Though it wasn't shiny or new, it felt like the most valuable thing she'd ever owned. That night, neither of them could sleep. They sat together at the kitchen table, examining the instrument and discussing how to make it playable again. Enrique promised to visit a local music shop the next day to see if they could repair it or at least replace the strings. True to his word, Enrique spent the following afternoon visiting several shops around town. Most of the store owners were skeptical when he explained what he needed, assuming he wouldn't be able to afford their services. But eventually, a kind elderly man at a small family-run shop took pity on him. "It's not in great shape, but I can fix it enough for practice," the man said, offering to do the repairs at a discounted price. Enrique thanked him profusely, knowing this was their best chance. When the repaired violin finally arrived back in their home, Maria couldn't contain her excitement. She ran her fingers over the freshly polished wood, marveling at how different it felt compared to the ruler she'd been using for practice. With trembling hands, she tightened the bow and drew it across the strings for the first time. The sound was rough and uneven, far from the smooth melodies she dreamed of creating. But it was music, and it was hers. Over the next few days, Maria practiced tirelessly, determined to tame the stubborn instrument. At first, every note sounded more like a screech than a song, and her neighbors often joked about the mystery noise coming from her house. But slowly, with patience and persistence, the screeches began to soften into recognizable tunes. Enrique would sit nearby, nodding along as she played simple scales and fragments of songs. Sometimes he'd clap quietly after she finished a piece, encouraging her to keep going even when frustration threatened to overwhelm her. Maria's newfound dedication didn't go unnoticed. One evening, as she practiced near the open window, a group of children playing outside stopped to listen. "Hey, isn't that Maria?" one of them whispered. Another giggled nervously, unsure whether to mock or admire her efforts. But before anyone could say anything hurtful, Maria glanced out the window and waved shyly. To her surprise, some of the kids waved back, curiosity replacing their initial skepticism. Though the violin still required frequent adjustments, and Maria's skills were far from polished, she cherished every moment she spent with it. For the first time in her life, she felt connected to something bigger than herself, a world of music that had once seemed impossibly out of reach. And deep down, she knew this was only the beginning. As Maria continued to practice with her repaired violin, word of her newfound hobby began to spread through the school like wildfire. At first, it was just whispers in the hallway, students giggling and pointing whenever they saw her carrying the battered case. "Look, there she goes again," one boy snickered as Maria walked past, clutching the violin tightly to her chest. "What's next? Is she going to start giving concerts?" Another chimed in with a laugh. "Maybe we should call her Maestro Maria." Though their words stung, Maria forced herself to ignore them. She reminded herself of her father's advice. Their opinions didn't define her potential. But even as she tried to focus on her music, the teasing grew louder and more frequent. Some teachers weren't much better. During lunch breaks, they would exchange smirks and sarcastic remarks about how adorable it was that the janitor's daughter thought she could play an instrument. "Let's see how far this little experiment goes," one teacher quipped during a staff meeting, unaware that Enrique was mopping nearby. He clenched his jaw but said nothing, choosing instead to channel his frustration into supporting Maria even more. Despite the ridicule, Maria refused to give up. Every evening, she practiced for hours, determined to improve no matter what anyone said. Her fingers blistered from pressing down on the strings, and her arms ached from holding the bow steady, but she pushed through the pain. Slowly, the screeching notes began to transform into something resembling music. Her father became her biggest cheerleader, sitting quietly in the corner of their tiny living room as she played. "You're getting better every day," he'd say proudly, clapping softly after each attempt. His encouragement kept her going, even on the toughest days. One afternoon, Maria decided to step outside her comfort zone. She brought her violin to school, not to show off, but simply because she wanted to practice during her free period. As she sat on a bench near the playground, carefully tuning the instrument, a small crowd began to gather. Some students watched curiously, while others jeered from a distance. "Oh, great, here comes the noise," one girl muttered loud enough for everyone to hear. Maria hesitated for a moment, feeling the weight of their stares. But then she remembered why she had started this journey, to prove not only to others, but also to herself that she was capable of greatness. Taking a deep breath, she placed the violin under her chin and began to play. The melody was simple, a folk tune she had memorized from one of the books, but it was clear and heartfelt. For a few seconds, the chatter around her faded, replaced by the soft sound of the violin floating through the air. When she finished, there was a brief silence before someone clapped awkwardly. Others quickly joined in, though some still wore skeptical expressions. "Not bad," one boy admitted grudgingly, while another shrugged and said, "Guess you're not completely terrible." The mixed reactions didn't bother Maria as much as they once might have. She realized that proving herself wasn't about silencing every critic. It was about staying true to her passion. That night, as she recounted the day's events to her father, she smiled faintly. "They don't get it yet, Papa," she said, "but I think maybe someday they will." Enrique nodded, his eyes filled with pride. "Someday soon," he agreed. "And when they do, they'll wish they'd believed in you sooner." Though the road ahead was still lined with challenges, Maria felt stronger than ever. Each insult, each mocking comment only fueled her determination to succeed. She knew that the harder they pushed against her, the brighter her resolve burned. Music had become her sanctuary, her voice in a world that often tried to silence her. And she wasn't about to let anyone take that away. The school talent show was just around the corner, and whispers about Maria's violin practice had reached a fever pitch. Some students were curious to see if she'd actually perform, while others openly doubted she'd have the courage to step on stage. "She's probably too scared," one classmate remarked during lunch, earning nods of agreement from their friends. But Maria heard none of it, or rather, she chose not to let it affect her. She had made up her mind. This was her chance to show everyone what she was capable of. When the sign-up sheet for the talent show went up on the bulletin board, Maria hesitated for only a moment before writing her name in neat block letters. Her hands trembled slightly as she pressed the pen to the paper, but she felt a surge of pride once it was done. That evening, when she told her father about her decision, Enrique beamed with quiet admiration. "You're braver than I ever was at your age," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Just remember, you're doing this for yourself, not for anyone else." As the days leading up to the performance grew shorter, Maria practiced harder than ever. She spent every spare moment fine-tuning her piece, a lively rendition of Vivaldi's Spring that she had painstakingly learned note by note. The melody was challenging, filled with quick runs and intricate bowing patterns, but Maria refused to settle for anything less than perfection. Her father sat beside her each night, offering words of encouragement whenever frustration threatened to overwhelm her. "Take your time," he'd say gently. "Every mistake is just another step closer to getting it right." On the night of the talent show, the school auditorium buzzed with excitement. Students, teachers, and parents filled the seats, chatting animatedly about who would win first prize. Backstage, Maria stood clutching her violin case, her heart pounding so loudly she was sure everyone could hear it. She glanced nervously at the other performers. Some were stretching, others practicing scales or rehearsing dance moves, all looking confident and prepared. Maria suddenly felt out of place, like an imposter among real talents. Doubts crept into her mind. What if she messed up? What if they laughed at her? But then she remembered her father's words. She wasn't doing this for applause or approval. She was doing it because she loved music, because it gave her strength when the world tried to bring her down. Taking a deep breath, she opened her violin case and carefully assembled her instrument. As she stepped onto the dimly lit stage, the murmurs in the audience grew louder. A few kids snickered, and some teachers exchanged knowing glances, clearly expecting her to stumble. Maria ignored them all, focusing instead on the spotlight shining down on her. For a brief moment, silence enveloped the room. Then, with steady hands, Maria raised the violin to her chin and drew the bow across the strings. The first note rang out clear and pure, silencing even the most skeptical critics. As the melody unfolded, the entire auditorium seemed to hold its breath. Maria poured every ounce of her soul into the performance, her fingers flying across the strings with a confidence no one expected. The music swelled and danced, painting vivid images of springtime blossoms and chirping birds. It wasn't perfect. There were moments where her timing faltered slightly, but it didn't matter. The raw emotion behind each note resonated deeply with everyone listening. By the time she played the final chord, the room erupted into thunderous applause. People rose to their feet, cheering and clapping as Maria lowered her violin, tears streaming down her face. For the first time in her life, she felt truly seen, not as the janitor's daughter or the girl people mocked, but as someone worthy of respect and admiration. Even those who had teased her couldn't hide their amazement. One teacher wiped away a tear, whispering to a colleague, "I can't believe we underestimated her." Backstage, Maria found her father waiting with open arms. He hugged her tightly, his own eyes glistening with pride. "You did it, Mlija," he whispered. "You showed them all." And for the first time, Maria realized that this wasn't just a victory for her. It was a triumph for anyone who had ever been told they weren't good enough. The applause that followed Maria's performance felt like a tidal wave washing away years of doubt and ridicule. As she stood on the stage, bowing shyly to the cheering audience, something inside her shifted. For so long, she had carried the weight of other people's low expectations, but now, in this moment, she realized she was stronger than all of it. The same teachers who had once mocked her were now approaching her backstage with sheepish smiles and heartfelt apologies. "Maria, I had no idea you were this talented," one teacher admitted, shaking her hand firmly. Another added, "We were wrong about you, and I'm sorry for underestimating you." Even the principal, Mr. Dawson, sought her out after the show. A tall man with a serious demeanor, he rarely attended school events unless absolutely necessary. But tonight, he stood before Maria, his expression soft and sincere. "That was extraordinary," he said, his voice filled with admiration. "You've proven that talent knows no boundaries. We'd be honored if you joined our school orchestra." Maria blinked in disbelief, unsure how to respond. Joining the orchestra. Her. It seemed impossible just months ago, yet here she was being offered an opportunity most students only dreamed of. But the surprises didn't stop there. When Mr. Dawson learned that Maria couldn't afford private lessons, a necessity for anyone serious about mastering the violin, he took matters into his own hands. He reached out to the district's music education fund, securing a scholarship that would cover not only lessons, but also the cost of renting a higher quality instrument. Within weeks, Maria found herself sitting in a cozy studio with Mrs. Alvarez, a retired violinist known for her patience and expertise. Under her guidance, Maria's skills improved rapidly, and her confidence soared. Word of Maria's achievement spread far beyond the school walls. Local newspapers picked up her story, dubbing her the girl who turned mockery into melody. Parents in the community began sharing her journey with their children, using her as an example of resilience and determination. Even some of her former bullies approached her during lunch breaks, offering awkward apologies and compliments. "I didn't think you'd actually pull it off," one boy confessed, scratching the back of his head nervously. "Guess I was wrong." Despite the newfound attention, Maria remained grounded. She never forgot where she came from or the struggles that shaped her. Every evening, she returned home to practice in the same tiny living room, where her journey had begun, her father sitting nearby with a proud smile. Together, they celebrated each milestone: the first time she mastered a difficult piece, the day she received her new violin, and even the small victories, like earning a standing ovation at a school concert. Her transformation inspired others too. One Saturday morning, a group of younger students knocked on her door, asking if she would teach them how to play the violin. Though hesitant at first, Maria agreed, seeing it as a chance to pay forward the kindness and support she'd received. With her father's help, she set up makeshift lessons in the school auditorium, guiding eager beginners through their first notes. Watching their faces light up as they produced their first clear tones reminded her of her own journey and how far she'd come. As weeks turned into months, Maria noticed a change not just in herself, but in those around her. Teachers who once dismissed her now greeted her warmly, calling her by name and asking about her progress. Classmates who used to tease her became her biggest supporters, cheering her on at every performance. Even the janitorial staff, including her father, rallied behind her, taking pride in her success as if it were their own. Through it all, Maria held on to one truth: this wasn't just her victory. It belonged to everyone who dared to believe in her when the odds seemed stacked against her. And though she still had much to learn, she knew she was ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. After all, she had already proven that dreams, no matter how unlikely, could become reality with enough passion and perseverance. With her newfound confidence and growing skill, Maria threw herself into the world of music with a passion that surprised even herself. Every day brought a new challenge, but she embraced each one with determination. Under the guidance of Mrs. Alvarez, her private instructor, Maria learned techniques she never imagined possible: how to create vibrato, how to shift smoothly between notes, and how to express emotion through subtle changes in bow pressure. Her fingers, once clumsy and uncertain, now moved gracefully across the strings, producing melodies that seemed to tell stories of their own. Her hard work paid off when she earned a spot in a prestigious summer music program for young musicians. The program was held at a sprawling university campus miles away from her hometown, and for the first time, Maria found herself surrounded by peers who shared her love for music. At first, she felt out of place among students from wealthy families who had been playing instruments since they were toddlers. But as soon as she began to play during group rehearsals, her talent silenced any lingering doubts, not just from others, but within herself. The highlight of the summer came when Maria performed alongside other gifted musicians in a grand concert hall. As she stood on stage, bathed in golden light, she realized how far she had come. Just 2 years ago, she had practiced with an imaginary violin in her cramped living room. Now she was performing in front of hundreds of people, her name listed proudly in the program. When she finished her solo piece, a hauntingly beautiful rendition of Bach's Air on the G string, the audience erupted into applause, some even rising to their feet. For the first time, Maria allowed herself to fully embrace the joy of being celebrated for her talent. Back home, Maria continued to inspire those around her. She became a mentor to younger children in her community, teaching them not only how to hold a violin, but also how to believe in themselves. One boy, Miguel, reminded her so much of her younger self, quiet and unsure, yet eager to learn. "What if I'm not good enough?" he asked during their first lesson, echoing the same fears Maria had once carried. Smiling gently, she replied, "You don't have to be perfect. You just have to try." Maria's dedication didn't go unnoticed. By her senior year of high school, she had become a local celebrity of sorts, invited to perform at community events and fundraisers. People marveled at how far she had come, from the shy girl practicing in secret to the poised musician commanding attention on stage. Yet despite all the accolades, Maria remained humble, always crediting her father and her teachers for believing in her when no one else did. Her greatest achievement came when she received a letter of acceptance from a renowned conservatory, a dream she had once thought impossible. The scholarship covered nearly all expenses, ensuring that financial barriers wouldn't stand in her way. On the day she opened the envelope, tears streamed down her face as she hugged her father tightly. "We did it, Papa," she whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. Enrique simply nodded, too choked up to speak. As graduation approached, Maria reflected on her journey. The teasing, the sacrifices, the late-night practices, and the moments of triumph. She knew none of it would have been possible without resilience, support, and an unshakable belief in herself. And though she was leaving her small town behind, she vowed never to forget where she came from. Her story wasn't just hers. It belonged to every child who dared to dream against the odds. Leaving her hometown was bittersweet, but Maria carried its lessons with her wherever she went, whether it was mentoring young musicians or sharing her story with aspiring artists. She made it her mission to remind others that greatness often begins in the most unexpected places. Little did she know, her journey was only beginning. And the world was about to hear her voice louder than ever before. Years passed, and Maria's journey took her farther than she, or anyone else, could have ever imagined. The shy girl who once practiced with an imaginary violin in a tiny kitchen now stood on the grand stage of Carnegie Hall, bathed in the warm glow of spotlight. As she adjusted the polished violin under her chin, she glanced out at the sea of faces in the audience. Among them sat her father, Enrique, his eyes glistening with pride as he watched his daughter fulfill a dream that had once seemed impossible. For Maria, this moment wasn't just about personal triumph. It was about honoring everyone who had believed in her, even when the world doubted her. The concert hall fell silent as Maria drew the bow across the strings, filling the space with the opening notes of Tchaikovsky's Violin Concerto in D major. Each note soared gracefully, carrying with it the weight of years of struggle, sacrifice, and unwavering determination. The melody told her story, the laughter of classmates, the dismissive remarks of teachers, the late-night practices in her humble home, and the quiet strength of her father mopping school hallways to provide for her. It was as if every note carried a memory, weaving together a tapestry of resilience and hope. When she finished the final movement, the audience erupted into applause, many rising to their feet in admiration. Tears streamed down Maria's face as she bowed deeply, overwhelmed by gratitude. She dedicated the performance to her father, whose sacrifices had made everything possible, and to all the invisible children like her, young dreamers written off by society, but capable of achieving greatness. Her voice trembled as she spoke into the microphone. "If I can stand here today, so can you. Don't let anyone tell you what you cannot do." Back in her hometown, news of Maria's success spread like wildfire. Teachers who had once mocked her now proudly shared her story with their students, using her as an example of perseverance and grit. "This is what happens when you refuse to give up," one teacher said during a classroom discussion, holding up a newspaper article about Maria's Carnegie Hall debut. Parents told their children bedtime stories about the janitor's daughter who turned mockery into music, inspiring a new generation to chase their dreams despite adversity. Maria didn't forget her roots. Whenever she returned home, she visited her old school, standing before wide-eyed students and sharing her journey. She encouraged them to embrace their passions, no matter how far-fetched they might seem. "Dream big," she would say, her voice steady and sincere. "And don't be afraid to work hard for those dreams. Talent is important, but perseverance will take you further than anything else." Her words resonated deeply, especially among kids from families like hers. Working-class households where opportunities often felt out of reach. Her influence extended beyond motivational speeches. Maria established a foundation aimed at providing musical instruments and lessons to underprivileged children. Through fundraisers and partnerships with local schools, she ensured that no child would have to practice with makeshift tools or go without guidance because of financial constraints. "Music saved me," she often said. "I wanted to save others too." As the years went by, Maria's legacy grew. She performed in prestigious venues around the world, earning accolades and awards, yet she remained grounded in her mission to inspire. Every time she stepped onto a stage, She reminded herself of the little girl who had dared to pick up a battered violin against all odds. That girl still lived inside her, fueling her passion and driving her forward. In the end, Maria's story became more than just a tale of individual achievement. It became a beacon of hope. It reminded people that talent isn't defined by wealth or privilege. It's nurtured through courage, hard work, and belief in oneself. And though life may present challenges, those challenges can become stepping stones to something extraordinary. Maria proved that even the smallest spark of determination could ignite a fire bright enough to light up the world.